Hey, I'm Nick Schade. Welcome back to the Guillemot Kayaks Workshop. Today we're going to be putting the second layer of glass on the bottom of the boat. Some may question why I'm putting two layers. It's just sort of added armor for hitting stuff. And in the process of doing this, I will wrap that bottom layer down past the shear line onto the deck a bit, so it will act as the outside shear tape as well. So bonding the deck to the hull. I already have the interior tape. This is reinforcing the exterior seam. The heat just came on there. I've turned the heat up here to warm up the shop as much as I can. The process today will be pretty similar to the other glassing, which you can see in earlier episodes. The biggest difference is it's not going to use as much epoxy for the simple reason that the wood is already sealed. So the wood's not going to be absorbing any epoxy. We're just laying the glass up against the already existing glass and epoxy, so it's not going to take that much epoxy to get that wet out. I'm going to be masking off about an inch or so below the part line. If you remember back when I did the fill coat on the deck, I masked off the bottom inch and a half or so of the deck. So that same inch and a half is where the lap is going to be for the cloth coming from the hull. So I'm going to put two strips of masking tape. The first is going to be down below that edge, and it's going to be a piece of fairly wide tape, and I'm going to fold over the bottom edge of that tape to make a drip edge. Then I'm going to put another one on top of that. So the first one will be a blue tape, the second one will be a green tape. The second green tape will be pretty much right at that line where I'd masked off when I was doing the fill coat earlier. So the process will be lay the glass on, wet it out, down onto that green tape. Let it set up a little bit, come back, trim off the excess glass, let it set up a little bit more, then apply a good heavy fill coat. That first trimming will take off the green tape. The fill coat will overlap onto the blue tape, and then I will let that set up some more and peel the blue tape. That way I will have masking for both epoxy processes. I will also be wrapping some bias cut tape around the stems here at each end, and we'll see how it all goes. So this is another layer of E-glass, 4 ounce. So as I said before, the process of wetting out the second layer of cloth is just like wetting out the first layer of cloth. The primary difference is, since there's already epoxy and fiberglass down on the surface of the boat does not absorb any epoxy. It wets out a lot quicker. I don't need as much resin. I don't need to worry about wood sucking resin into the grain and starving the cloth. I can spread it out and move fairly quickly, get it all spread out. Again, I'm going all the way down to the green tape on both sides, switching sides as needed, and then start pulling it down the sides to the green tape. When I got enough down to the green tape, I start pulling any excess lengthwise, and I pull that as far as I can until it just doesn't seem to do anymore. As soon as I find that the squeegee's not doing much, I stop using the squeegee and mix up another batch. So it's not something where you want to keep on stroking it, trying to get it to go as far as possible. You want to get it spread out quickly. Looks pretty good. You know, there might be a couple blotches here and there where it's not completely soaked in. Don't sweat it too much. You can come back at this point. If things are spread out, you're good. So when I'm done with the first batch, I mix up another batch. Mixing is the same. Thoroughly mix down into the corners, wipe down the edges, and make sure it's thoroughly mixed. Again, that's where most people have their worst mistakes, is somehow they mess up the mix. Get the pumps right, and then thoroughly mix it. And when you think it's thoroughly mixed, give it a little bit more of a mix. So then I pour some more on the bottom and start spreading it around. you notice as I'm going, I'm bringing it down towards the end. And so most of my squeegee strokes are lengthwise. I'm pulling that cloth tight or down. So I'm pulling it down the length of the boat and down the side of the boat. I try not to go back and forth. If I do, it's possible I end up with a big wrinkle. So try and keep moving down towards the ends of the boat and spread it out nice and evenly. Again, we're getting down to the green tape on both sides. Back here at the skeg box, I need to be a little careful. I don't want to pour a gallon of epoxy down into the skeg slot. I'm careful that I don't get more than I need into that area. As I get down to the ends, I'm able to squeegee it out pretty far just with excess that was on there. Again, you sort of get calibrated for how much epoxy the boat's going to need when it's got bare wood. I found that I put on more than I really needed because the wood's no longer bare, and so I'm able to squeegee that down the length. Get any shiny spot is where there's some excess resin, and if it's lots of big area, I'll try and pull that down, get it someplace that's dry. So I can pull it down to the end, and then when I mix up another batch, I'll end up brushing a little bit more on the ends, get that wet out nicely. Once I no longer have that nice level surface on the bottom, I don't try and pour it on because it's just going to drip off. I don't need to make more of a mess of my floor than I already have. So brushing, I brush it on, and again, I'm brushing sort of diagonally, lengthwise and down. If I pull backwards, I may pull a snag. I'm not trying to wet it out completely with the brush. I know there's going to be plenty on there with a few brush strokes. The brush strokes just take some epoxy out of my mixing cup and put it on the boat. Once I think I have enough brushed on, I'll spread it out with a squeegee. Again, either lengthwise or down or diagonal strokes, trying to pull that cloth tight onto the surface. As soon as I'm done spreading it on, I can squeegee off the excess. So same grunge cup idea, slit into a paper cup, just with fairly firm pressure, pull the squeegee along the surface, sort of a 45-degree angle using the sharper edge of the squeegee. I'm pulling out the excess, pulling it down, maintaining that angle as I come over the chine and down, and then excess into the grunge cup. And just repeat, working down the whole length of the boat, trying to get just the right amount of epoxy in there. We don't want it shiny, we want it matte, we don't want it to look starved, sort of gray. And this goes pretty quickly, and again, I do not need to worry about the wood soaking up excess resin and starving the cloth. I have the wood all sealed now, except for where I did the sanding through, but that's another story. And so, get it all squeegeed out. so I'm brushing it on pretty thick. I've added a tiny bit of Cabosil to the epoxy. I don't mix up big batches of epoxy all at once. I mix up fairly small batches so I don't have it kick off in my bucket. I want everything good and runny when I apply it. And I'm brushing right down onto that blue tape. I'll come back in an hour or so, peel that tape off after all the drips have finished dripping. This is where I get my really good boat-shaped drip marks on my floor. Again, I'm applying enough epoxy here that I expect some to run off. And you may be concerned about sags and drips and so forth. I've found, again, if I do this systematic procedure, horizontal, vertical, horizontal strokes, I will get a good even film thickness. And if the film thickness is nice and even, any sagging it does happens uniformly all the way across the surface. So I don't tend to get big, ugly sag. In order to do this with a thick coat, you need to be very careful about getting a good even coat. If you're not confident in your ability to get an even coat, then maybe you're better off rolling on multiple thin coats, or even first one squeegee it on to start to fill the weave, then start rolling on more and more coats. That can take a lot of time. You need to wait for it to tack up sufficiently to put the next coat on, and depending on the temperature of your shop, if you're starting early in the morning with your saturation coat of the fiberglass and waiting 2 hours with each one in between coats, you may end up having a very late night if you're putting on thin coats. So personally, I like to get on one thick coat right away, and then I will let that set up and start the initial sanding of that. I almost certainly will do another fill coat, but the next one I do, I'm going to have the boat on edge. It drains off the most on the sides here where the surface is vertical, and so if I tip it up on edge next time, this will be now the horizontal surface, and the bottom and the top will be the vertical surface, and that'll tend to even out those surfaces. And it does a good job in starting to mask and feather out and bury the overlap of the two layers of glass, which now is right above that blue tape. In the perfect world, when this is done, you won't see where the seam is. There'll be nothing to give away exactly where the seam is. I rarely succeed in the perfect world, but that's what we're attempting to get. That is all for today. I'm headed off to Akume Fest. Like I said, I think my next process will be some sanding and then some more fill coats with the boat on edge. We'll see what we get to, what my timing is. If you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, please give me a thumbs up. If you're enjoying this whole series and you want to see more stuff like this, please hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and if you're really into what I'm doing and want to help produce these videos, head over to Patreon, chip in a small amount. It really does help, and I really do appreciate it. So, until the next episode, thanks for watching and happy paddling.